Welcome to this webinar organized by the Centro Studi sul Federalismo, and it's a webinar on the SPD proposal of a 28th Army towards a European dual army. And I'm Flavio Brugnoli, I'm the director of the Centro Studi sul Federalismo, and we decided to organize this webinar after the important paper that was released by the SPD, the German Social Democratic Party, on the European 28th Army. And it's a concrete proposal, and it's very interesting for us because it's very similar to those put forward in the last few years by the Centro Studi sul Federalismo, and notably thanks to the relentless activity and research of Domenico Moro, the coordinator of our security and defense area. And these ideas are well rooted in the federalist theory and also in some historical experience of federal states, like, for example, the United States. But at the same time, the SPD paper is a fresh and welcome and timely opportunity to open a concrete debate in a critical moment for the future of European security and defense. We are unfortunately, understandably, all focused on the pandemic, but obviously we should have a forward-looking approach and work on these issues which are vital for the future of the European Union. So let's start. We have the pleasure and honor of having with us Dr. Fritz Folgentreu. Dr. Folgentreu is a member of the Deutsche Bundestag since 2013, and since then he is also a member of the Defense Committee of the Bundestag. And our works will be organized with presentation by Dr. Folgentreu of the SPD proposal, then with some comments by our Domenico Moro, and then we will have a panel with very important and very expert speakers, and but I will introduce the panelists later. So once more, thank you very much for being with us. Dr. Folgentreu, you have the floor for presenting the SPD proposal.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm very grateful for having this opportunity, and I must say you are the first international partner of the SPD that has actually picked up on our idea in such a constructive and in the way I see it, supportive manner. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to have this discussion with you. I have read your comments as far as you have sent them to me, and I think they're a fantastic basis for having an in-depth discussion of what we might accomplish if the political will is there. The basic idea goes back to two observations, or one observation and one political impulse that was given by the French President Macron last year. I think it was now some 18 months ago that Macron said that he invited the European partners to build a truly European army. Une vraie armée européenne, or something like that is the way he phrased it. And the French idea was to have some kind of intervention army, but parallel to European structures, not within. And this was criticized from the beginning, at least from the German point of view, because we believe that if you have a parallel structure outside the European Union, it won't be much more than another coalition of the willing, and I can see the French point, because they believe in the efficacy of such a model, because it could be French-led. But in my opinion, if we really want to have make structural progress and achieve something that benefits the entire Union, then we would have to think within the structures of the European Union and not outside of it. That was one thing that we picked up on, because we felt that the fundamental idea of making progress towards a European army is a good thing. At the same time, we have observed that progress is being made and has been made on many fields. First of all, in terms of bilateral or more than bilateral cooperations on a national level. For example, Germany is cooperating extremely well with the army of the German army is cooperating extremely well with the army of the Netherlands. We have combined command structures like the combined Danish, Polish, and German command in Stettin on the Baltic coast for NATO. And we have the French-German brigade that is not working as well as the German-Netherlands cooperation, but which also serves as a model for bilateral cooperation. At the same time, we have made some progress on the European level with the establishment of PESCO and the EDF. So we have an evolutionary process that leads to further integration, even on the level of military cooperation, but it is very slow. And it seems to me that, and to many, and I believe you can relate to that, that the world is changing faster than maybe this slow progress is made for. And the third thing is, whenever you discuss Europe, I always see a triangle of impossibilities. One thing is that everybody expects Europe to be more efficient. To be more efficient and be better equipped to further European interests worldwide than it has been in the past. We expect Europe to act like a state successfully. At the same time, we never, as members of the European Union, are particularly willing to enter upon the discussion of giving up sovereignty. We've already ceded a lot of sovereignty to the European Union, and every further such proposal is met with distrust. Not only, but particularly from the more recent members in the eastern half of Europe, but it is generally not a popular topic. And thirdly, and that is the third side of this triangle of impossibilities, the European institutions are slow decision makers and oftentimes end up blocking proposals made by one side. So the efficiency just isn't there, because the European institutions are hampered by their own weight, you might see, and by the sloth of their decision making, which is not a moral judgment. It's something that is structural. That is an intrinsic problem that basically stems from the fact that we try to reach as broad a consensus as possible in almost everything, and that whenever we make decisions, we try to make them in such a way that the smaller, less influential members of the EU don't feel they're being forced to do something they don't want to do. This is a matter of respect, but also of cohesion within the European Union. So all of this taken together made us come up with the idea of accepting the evolutionary process that leads to more military integration within the European Union, but adding something besides it that will not call into question the sovereignty of the single nation states, that will not require them to submit parts of their armed forces under a European roof, but that will simply add a European structure to the national structures that we have. That was the fundamental idea. It seemed like something we could use to sever the Gordian knot of European defense policies. So this is how we came up with the fundamental concept of a 28th Army. We started discussing this pretty much a year ago in January last year. And after that, we needed to make some progress in terms of practicality. It felt improper to simply come up with a brilliant idea without ever drawing a proposal of how it might work. So our paper is actually an attempt at at showing in which way such a 28th Army might be conceived. The way we have done this is something that comes out of our German thinking about these matters, and that comes from the way we have organized our decision making and our military in Germany. It was always understood that this is a very social democratic and very German approach that doesn't need to be adopted in every detail by our European partners, because it's clear to me that other European countries with different political and military traditions will see some of the points mentioned here critically and will come up with other ideas. But in order to have a starting point for a discussion, this is what we came up with. That's why we start from the idea of having a military under parliamentary control like we have in Germany, but in the hands of the Commission, like the Bundeswehr, of course, is led and employed by the German government. This is we're using this parallelism, although we are fully aware of the fact that the Commission is not a government and the European Parliament is not the same as a national parliament, particularly because in terms of representation, it doesn't have the same, what's the English word for it? It doesn't fully represent the European population in its breadth, because smaller countries have a larger weight within have a larger weight within the delegations of the European Parliament. But this was when you speak about finance, about political control, about leadership, leadership structures. This was one thing that we have developed from the starting point of our German approach. But aside from that, when you form a completely new army, which is what this would be, of course, you have to start small. I read in your comments that if you start with a body of about 1,500 troops, this will not be in any way sustainable. And in order, if you actually wanted to employ it, it would have to rely on cooperation with external partners. So that the question of national sovereignty would come into play again on this level. That is evident, and I don't dispute that, but you have to start small. And the basic idea is that in the long run, you would come up with an army the size of a brigade, and some 8,000 people who would also contain the support structures that are necessary to actually maintain an army. With 8,000, you're a bit more independent. But still, there's nothing that would convert the European Union into a military power in short terms. It would, however, answer the call of Josep Borrell, who said that Europe needs to learn to speak with the language of power. And it would give European diplomacy a handle to support a diplomatic initiative with military prowess, where something in the modest dimensions of such a European army could make a difference. So this is generally what our idea was. and I'm thrilled to be able to discuss it with you. And I'm very curious about the Italian perspective on establishing a 28th Army in the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Felgentreu. By the way, I don't know whether an English translation of your paper is already available.
Not yet. We're working on it.
We're working on it. We have an Italian translation made by Domenico Moro.
Oh, please send it to us. It would be great to have it. If you, Signora Moro, if you could send us the your translation, I would be very happy.
Sure. Okay. With pleasure. We are a front runner on translations as well.
It is not a good translation in any case.
It's much better than any translation I could have made.
Don't be too modest. It's a fair translation.
Il mio italiano non è così buono.
Oh, okay. Very good. So now I give, thank you very much once more for the presentation. Now I give the floor to my colleague and friend Domenico Moro for his comments on the proposal. And Domenico has some slides, as you already can see. Mm-hmm. So you have the floor, Domenico.
Do you see the slides?
I do.
Yeah, fine.
Thank you. Okay. But, okay. I'd like to thank Mr. Felgentreu and the other panelists for attending this meeting on the SPD proposal. The SPD proposal, according to me, has the merit of having opened the debate on European defense with a concrete and sound basis. Above all, because this proposal has also an historical basis due to the American experience of this military structure that is based on two levels, a federal level and a national level. The innovative aspects of this proposal, according to me, are to establish a European army not as a replacement for national armies, but as an addition to them, to provide for European parliamentary control with the establishment of a specific commission for European defense within the European Parliament, and to overcome the intergovernmental approach based on national sovereignty. But however, there are a number of caveats, institutional and operational. These remarks, in any case, do not undermine the importance of the proposal. I want to resume only the main one very briefly. First of all, if we want to avoid institutional duplication, probably, we have to keep in mind that the current EU current institutional structure provides that the High Representative for Foreign and Security Policy is appointed by qualified majority by the European Council in agreement with the President of the European Commission. The HR is also Vice President of the Commission and in that capacity is appointed by the European Parliament. Secondly, in order to avoid creating parallel structures within existing European institutions, the solution could be the integration of the 28th Army into existing EU structures and, for example, utilize the European military planning and conduct capability as its operational structure. About the operational caveats, the main remarks is that if the problem of duplication of structures is to be overcome, we should put in charge of European institutions some initiatives that have already been launched on a multinational basis, such as Eurocorps, which already has a military staff, albeit at a divisional level. I'd like to remember that, for example, Eurocorps will be engaged in UTM Mali and UTM RCA. This means that this multinational military structure is already utilized by the European institution. It is true that only a small share of Eurocorps resources are utilized, but in any case, in principle, this means that it is possible to think about a utilization of an integration of this multinational structure, military structure within the European framework. About the operational caveats, if we want to avoid overlapping, another possibility would be to put the command and resources of the ongoing civil and military missions under the permanent control of the European General Staff. In this case, one question that may arise is what is the 28th Army for? According to me, the main task of the 28th Army must be the so-called, for example, Petersburg tasks. In any case, if the idea is to promote an initiative by the available countries, we can see that there are at least 4 countries, such as France, Germany, Italy, and Spain, that are among the biggest contributors to the executive military missions promoted by the European Union. EUNAVFOR Atalanta, EUNAVFOR Sofia, and EUFOR Altea in Bosnia and Herzegovina, for example. These 4 European countries could be the basis for a coalition of the willing, able to promote an initiative for the 28th Army. The problem is that we know that the European treaties, in some ways, limit the possibility of establishing a European army. For example, it is true that European treaties foresee the passerelle or bridging clause or the flexibility clause. But we know that this possibility exclude this article of the treaty exclude their use in the military field. But, however, there is one possibility that could be, according to me, explored: the constructive abstention. The constructive abstention is foreseen under the chapter specific provisions concerning the common foreign and security policy. It has been utilized in 2008 for the EU mission in Kosovo. This article, together with other article of the European, of the current European treaties, could be utilized to launch an enhanced cooperation in the military field and also move the procedural decision from unanimity toward qualified majority. It is a possibility to be, in my opinion, according to me, to be analyzed in a more detail, but I think that could be exploited. Starting with an enhanced cooperation in order to establish the 28th Army, according to me, is indispensable if there is to be a structural change in the military balance between the European Union and the UK. Indeed, currently, the British government is considering the possibility of conditioning the European Union foreign and defense policy through the UK enhanced role within NATO. This explain this move of the British government, explain the current British military effort. In any case, however difficult it may be after the Brexit, this way, that of the constructive abstention, could be followed if exists the political will. If there is no political will to exploit the existing treaties, there is hardly any will to change them currently. In any case, in order to arrive at my proposal, I'd like to remember that Louis Gauthier, the Macron advisor for European defense, during an hearing at the National Assembly in 2018, announced that France, in the spring of 2022, will present a proposal for a defense and security union to be implemented with or without a treaty change. It may be useful for this proposal and the SPD proposal converge in a single Franco-German proposal. In this perspective, this step may require that the SPD proposal and its merger with the French idea be supported by the socialist group in the European Parliament. I think that indeed the possibility of a merging between the two ideas, if the European Parliament support the proposal of the SPD proposal, and above all the merge of this proposal with the French proposal, we could have the chance to start a real debate on European defense, starting in the spring of the next or the following year, during the French presidency. I finished my short intervention with remembering that the problem obviously is France. France need to do this in the military field the same choice that Kohl did in the monetary field, that is, give up at least part, at least a share of its sovereignty in this military, in the military field. Until the France will not don't do this choice, it's difficult to go forward toward a European defense. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Domenico, and thank you to our two first speakers for being so synthetic, and so we have plenty of time for the debate with the panel, and I would like to underline that the public can participate to the debate by sending questions in the question and answer section of Zoom. As for the panelists, we have some last-minute changes. Unfortunately, Major Enrico Della Gatta cannot be with us for a last-minute serious family problem, so the best for that. And but we know he has told us that he will be pleased to participate to future initiatives on this issue, which he considers very relevant. And I say that the proposal has three main elements. One is obviously related to the military dimension. The second is related to the institutional dimension, and the third to the political dimension. And our panelists are covering all these three areas. And we start with Brando Benifei, and Brando is member of the European Parliament. Unfortunately, he cannot be with us for previous engagement, and but he has sent us a video message. And Brando is also president of the Spinelli Group, so the group gathering the federalist members of the European Parliament. So, and it's also a well-known member of the European Federalist Movement since when he was very, very young. So it's really a pleasure anyway to have a message from Brando. And I kindly ask my colleague Elisabetta to start with the video message.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, dear Federalists, it is with deep regret that I cannot take part actively to today's interesting webinar organized by the Centro Studi per il Federalismo on the SPD proposal on a dual army. I'm unfortunately caught in other commitments with also a long work going on for trilogue negotiations to conclude, an ongoing political crisis, as well as the preparation of a mission to the EU border with Bosnia-Herzegovina. So I wish to thank you, however, for having offered me the possibility to say a few words in a video message, which I'm pleased to deliver in my capacity of member of the AFCO committee in the European Parliament, as well as the president of the Spinelli Group. Let me start by saying that the SPD proposal is indeed an exciting proposal, having the potential to spark important and high-level discussion inside the institutions. Indeed, some of the suggested elements will trigger, inevitably, very lively discussions. In first instance, since it proposes a shift away from the current model of intergovernmental cooperation by establishing an additional autonomous EU army, but also because of its potential implications in the institutional front, especially when it comes to the search of the adequate balance between the general foreign and security policy interests of the Union and those of its member states. Far from being interpreted as a matter of subsidiarity, this fine-tuning exercise is going to have also a central and prominent political relevance, both in the parliamentary debate and in the future negotiations. The European Parliament has adopted last week during the plenary session its Common Security and Defence Policy Annual Report, a very useful resolution which delineates in a precise manner the perimeter of the present and upcoming challenges that the EU and member states are called to address. The text is founded on the acknowledgement that the Union must play a bigger and ever-increasing role in the international scene in order to ensure the security of its citizens. Increasing multilateral threats, the growing instability of its neighborhood and the EU dependency on third countries, also made visible during the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic, obliged the EU to take ambitious initiatives to reshape the Union's strategic environment. The Parliament resolution insists on the need to achieve a strategic autonomy, even calling on the High Representative to elaborate a clear definition of it, but also warns about the lack of ambition shown in the recent times, for example, in the context of the negotiations on the annual budget, which resulted in a decrease of funding for key programs in the field of defense, research and development, notably in the cases of the European Defence Fund, on which I worked already in the past mandate, or in the military mobility program. While the text of the parliamentary resolution contains a very accurate snapshot of the current situation, I believe that it falls short when it comes to the conclusions, or rather the deliverables, of such an analysis. I'm convinced, in fact, that it is imperative to put in motion today an organized and pragmatic discussion for relaunching the agenda on the establishment of a European army, which in my view represents an indispensable element to address if we are serious about the achievement of the Union's strategic autonomy. To be clearer, this does not mean that the EU security should be borne solely on the EU army's shoulders, of course. It means that the lack of a credible political commitment, especially in the Council, to start working on the creation of a EU military contingent would also be revealing of the lack of adequate ambition towards the achievement of more general foreign and security policy goals of the Union as well. The SPD proposal sketches out in writing a framework that deserves to be discussed in great detail. I believe that our political group in the European Parliament, the SD group, should support this proposal and make it its own, or at the very least, it should open up a direct communication channel with the SPD party colleagues in order to insert this document within the official parliamentary channels and use it as a catalyst or a trigger for future reform. For sure, the Spinelli Group will dedicate adequate attention to the proposal and will add it to its dossiers when discussing foreign policy, defense and security matters. We are all expecting the Conference on the Future of Europe to kick off, despite the frustrating delay that we have been experiencing until now. The conference will open up as an agora for discussions, also in the field of European defense. It is ultimately our responsibility as members of parliament, but in this context, it is valid also for the representatives of the civil society and the academia to raise the level of ambition of this exercise. Today's debate goes in the right direction, and for this reason, I will be looking forward to receive the conclusions of your debate. Allow me to conclude by thanking Domenico Moro and Flavio Brugnoli for their invitation and their extraordinary work at the Centro Studi per il Federalismo. In particular, I grasp this opportunity to thank once again Domenico for his collaboration earlier this year on my work in AFCO on the Parliament recommendation to the Council and the High Representative on the Permanent Structured Cooperation, PESCO. Indeed, another key tool to deepen the integration of the Union in the field of defense. So thank you very much for your attention and looking forward for meeting and discussing again soon.
So I would like to thank once more Brando Benifei for this message, also because I think it's relevant from the political point of view, and he is suggesting, proposing some further steps that are obviously very relevant. Now I move to the second panelist, General Vincenzo Camporini, and General Camporini is covering all the fields I was mentioning before, because obviously he is now scientific advisor to the Istituto Affari Internazionali in Rome, which is, by the way, the most important partner of our center in Italy. And General Camporini is also active in the Italian political debate, but obviously he is former Chief of Defense Staff of Italy. So, and last but not least, Vincenzo is a very good friend of our center. So, General Camporini, Vincenzo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It is a real pleasure to talk about this subject, which has been in my heart since 1999, when the Helsinki Headline Goal was approved, and I am proud to say that I am one of the 4 authors of this paper, which in a way started a new dimension in the field of European defense. Although later steps did not follow as we wanted, but the subject is still something which is, I would say, not only crucial, it's vital for the future of Europe. Europe does not have any future unless some steps is made in this direction. Not only because we have the ambition of having an army, but because the army is one of the instruments of a sound foreign policy. Let me quote a Russian social scientist who recently spoke about the mediation in the Middle East. And they said, very simply, a mediator in such an environment is credible if he has a gun in his pocket. Without the gun in the pocket, it's just wishful thinking. Therefore, we need some military capability to be employed in support of a common foreign policy. A common foreign policy may be something distant in the future overall. But I believe that we can identify some specific situation in which there is the convergence of the interest of not all, but of many European countries. And therefore, we must do something in order to provide this willingness with the proper instrument. And the proposal of the SPD is very interesting. Also because it is in a way the revival of the CED. In 1953-54, the discussion was about the possibility to establish a common military force without cancelling the national forces. In the treaty, the national forces were still to be active, although with the role of National Guard. So in a way, there are some similarities because we were already considering the possibility of having a single political leadership in order to govern the military capabilities, a single budget in order to finance jointly this capability. So I believe that it is very interesting that in the year 2020-21, one political party in the biggest country in Europe revives these ideas in a way that may be conducive to some step forward. Do we have the instruments for doing that within the present treaty? Some doubt, but I do not doubt, because I believe that if we read attentively, carefully, the concept of PESCO in the European Treaty, we see that we have already the possibility to establish something which is very similar to the proposal of the SPD. Unfortunately, the way PESCO has been embodied did not go in a very concrete way. But again, the legislation is there, and we should try to exploit this legislation in order to obtain a capability which is controlled not by the single countries, but by a political body formed by the countries, but not according to the interest of the single capitals. It is something which is for sure a step forward, a big step forward, but it is unavoidable, going back to my initial statement, if we want to have a saying in the future of our peoples, of our countries. If we do not enter this new dimension, we would waste a lot of money, because we will spend money in a very inefficient way in Europe, and we are investing money in the military, a lot of money, but with the outcome of each single euro we spend is much less than the output of a single dollar in the US budget. Therefore, we need to make significant structural progress, and I believe that the SPD proposal, which may seem provocative, is an extremely important step in order to have the debate looking towards practical solutions and not remaining always in the field of theory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General Camporini. I forgot to mention that General Camporini has co-signed the article on the SPD proposal published by the Centro Studi sul Federalismo, and he has co-signed the article with Domenico Moro. So thank you also for that. And now we have with us Daniel Fiot. Daniel is well known as one of the leading experts on security and defense issues in Europe, and currently he is security and defense editor at the EU Institute for Security Studies. So it's to some extent he is a colleague working in a think tank, one of the leading think tank in Europe on these issues. So Daniel, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you all hear me firstly? Okay, that's very good. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation to such a debate. And thank you already to all of the speakers so far for giving us already a lot of meat on the bone, a lot of reflections, and especially to Dr. Flegentro for giving us an overview of the ideas. And I would argue actually also giving us a bit of a sense of the impulse for where the ideas come from, because for me at least, the idea of provocative ideas, if you wish to call them this, comes from a very good place, but born of bad experiences, which I think, if I can say very clearly, and it's no surprise to everyone, that Europe's strategic landscape and surroundings and place in the world is being questioned. So from a social science point of view even, I guess the fact that we as Europeans witness a deterioration in our security, in our living standards, in our standing in the world, if we can call ourselves the old continent, you know, we have a certain degree of pride as well that we have to ensure. Then, of course, it is not a good sign if we feel that we're losing this. And in fact, maybe to echo or quote what was said by the French Defense Minister, Madame Florence Parly, the other day about Europe maybe losing its place in the world and some of the consequences of this. And I personally think in the security and defense field, we should take these warnings very seriously because the world is rapidly changing. So in terms of the idea, I think it comes from a very good place. However, as a person who is in a think tank, but also has one foot inside the institutional architecture, allow me to reflect maybe on some possible restrictions, but also some possibilities, because I think even if the idea itself is not carried out to its fullest extent as contained in the paper and the concepts, I think it nevertheless contains a number of elements which would be of benefit for European defense anyway. Let me say that. Let me begin first by saying that 2021 will be an absolutely critical year for European defense, because we will start, and we have started actually, with the German presidency in particular giving us this impulse to start, the strategic compass work, which a lot of you may have already heard about. Now, the strategic compass, I'm not going to give you an in-depth overview, but what the strategic compass is in reality is the missing piece of the jigsaw, if we can call it this, in EU security and defense. And what do I mean by this? Well, in 2016, when we had the global strategy presented, there were a lot of big ideas about the general objectives of the Union in foreign affairs and in security and defense. After the global strategy was published by the then High Representative Federico Mogherini, we then had a further reflection on what would we want to do in a broader sense with security and defense. And I think it's already been mentioned by Domenico Moro, the Petersburg tasks in particular. But what we saw there was a bit of a step forward, where the government said, look, the EU has to continue to be a crisis management actor. It has to also continue to build the capacity of partners. And we know this very well with the training missions, which have already been mentioned. But there is a third pillar, the protection of Europe and the protection of Europeans. However, I must say that after this very strong period of hyperactivity in conceptual thinking, we missed out a very crucial part, which was, what is it as Europeans do we want to do in a real sense, in operational terms? And I guess this would be my major question. If we have the 28th Army or if we have another concept, I think what we also need to dedicate some time to is being very clear about what type of action do we want to take at the EU level. Because as General Camporini just referenced the headline goals, you know, the ambition at that time, almost 20 years ago, my goodness, was to have 60,000 troops, a huge contingent of troops. We then had the battle group concept of 2,500 or up to 2,500. We're not clear today what type of military action we want to take, what type of military capabilities we will need for this. So this year will be at the EU level a very crucial year for answering these questions. Of course, it does not happen in a political vacuum. There are national elections, and I think already what has been mentioned is the Conference on the Future of Europe, where I'm sure the discussion about defense has to continue. We cannot deliver another product like the strategic compass and believe that the story is over. Certainly not. So these new ideas will help us. But I think what is crucial today is thinking about what type of military activity we would undertake together in common. And for that, you need what HRVP Josep Borrell has called for, and I think it's been echoed by a few other leaders as well in Europe, to build a common strategic culture, which does not come overnight. It's not you cannot magic it into existence, but it is very true that any common foreign policy and defense policy needs that common narrative, common understanding, and I think more importantly, by the way, a huge degree of strategic solidarity between the member states. And that's why I think last year, as the foundation basis for the campus, it was a very good idea at the EU level to undertake the first ever threat analysis or threat assessment that the EU faces. And this was not done as it is done in NATO, where they agree, you know, each member state, each ally agrees line by line what the threats are. It was a very different exercise. The intelligence capacity of the EU, so INTCEN as we call it, provided its own impartial analysis to the member states and confronted the member states with this reality. So I think that was the starting point for a kind of a strategic dialogue between the member states, for sure. Now they have the hard work of deciding what it is in practice they want to do. And I think has already been said excellently by a number of speakers, the strategic landscape for Europe today is very different. We have huge questions ahead of us, not only in our neighborhood, the Middle East, North Africa, Sahel, Horn of Africa, but also what do we do in the context of the rise of China, which is a big question mark. And also, and here I must say, I take myself out of the so-called honeymoon period that we are in at the moment with the new administration in the US. Of course, what is the long-term direction of traffic in Washington? We have serious questions there about if it's the same as how we think in Europe. Right? So very valid to get these ideas running. Now, before I end, let me try to be as practical as I can and also recognize the fact that we have come a very, very long way in security and defense at the EU level since about 2013, I would say, where some of you will remember the famous defense summit by Herman Van Rompuy, the former council president, which started the ball rolling, as it were, on the global strategy and all of the initiatives which have been mentioned, by the way, Defense Fund and permanent structured cooperation. On PESCO, we already have a specific project called the EU Crisis Response Corps, or to give it its acronym or abbreviation, the EU CROC. It is still a very young project. Yes, and on this CROC point, I normally joke with my Belgian colleagues, you know, is it a CROC monsieur or a CROC madame? I'm not sure which one it is, but nonetheless, the ambition is that there should be a core of European armies that are responsive to some of the crisis scenarios that may emerge. we are still at a very early stage on this, I should say. So we have to see in the coming years how this will develop. And as has already been said, what is the level of ambition by the member states themselves, okay? So there is the possibility of a core. However, the one point that it does not address to the SPD concept is the parliamentary control of the force. Because PESCO is, by its DNA, its nature, intergovernmental. That means all of the decisions are taken at the council level. However, and I would really like to salute Dominic Moro and General Camporini for being brave enough to look at the treaties that we have today, even without opening them up. And who can say never, by the way, in the future? We don't know where we will head with the treaties. But I would say that in addition to what has been said about possibilities related to enhanced cooperation, let's also not forget that Article 44 of the Treaty of the European Union also allows the Council to task a group of member states with a particular military or security and defense tasking. Now, that has not really been exploited, I would say. And I can think of a number of initiatives and examples where this would be the case. I mean, just look recently that the EU, not the EU, sorry, but a group of member states established a naval operation in the Strait of Hormuz near Iran. And this is not an EU operation. And of course, there are some difficulties because Denmark is not specifically in CSDP, so it cannot join legally. But these are the types of military operations which could be developed as part of a kind of Article 44 solution. We have to again see what political will exists for that, but there is a possibility in the treaties. On the parliamentary dimension, one of the aspects which I found very interesting, and in fact it's one of the points that I've made in some of my studies, is that, well, even if you don't have a 28th Army, there is still a strong case for enhancing the Security and Defense Subcommittee to a full committee. And I think if you look at, in particular, the European Defense Fund, which is a different instrument, it's not intergovernmental, it comes from the community approach. The Parliament has a huge say there. And rather interestingly, in one of the studies that I produced as well, you know, if you think this through, the Commission in the next few years will be talking and thinking about developing military capabilities. Now, I'm sure the General knows this and the others around the room know this, but you cannot develop military capabilities without having an understanding of the strategic scenario in which you wish to use them. Which means that the Commission all of a sudden, as the new actor in EU defense, has to think about scenarios, has to think about the strategic context in which capabilities should be developed and used. But that also means that the Parliament have a huge responsibility because they have oversight for the European Defence Fund. So I think just looking at EDF, but looking at other issues as well, there is certainly a strong case for enhancing the parliamentary dimension. The problem we always run into, of course, is the brick wall of the treaties, which do have this kind of separation of powers, at least on the military deployment side of things. So I will end here. I'm very happy to take any more questions from anyone in the debate. But you know, as the old saying goes, when the facts change on the ground, your ideas must change. And so I believe we're only at the beginning of a story here on EU defense. I believe our governments are changing their viewpoints and looking at the EU in security and defense in a very different way today than they did in the past. We must seize that momentum, and we have no time to lose, essentially, on this. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Very clear and very rich of ideas, proposals, also for our debate. And last but not least, as panelists, we have Dominic Ruiz de Veza. And Dominic is a member of the European Parliament. He is also a member of the SPD and recently he has become the vice president of the Union of European Federalists. But I always like to mention that we first met in Ventotene, so that's where all started for the Federalists to some extent. And Domenech, in the previous years, worked a lot with Joseph Borrell, and I suppose now he's still in contact with the High Representative. So probably you cannot speak on behalf of the High Representative, but you can speak to the High Representative. So Domenech, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Flavio. Can you hear me well? Thank you very much, Director Brugnoli. And indeed, if I'm not mistaken, we met aboard of the boat going to Ventotene in the summer of 2014. And we have been lucky to continue to be in touch. And it's a pleasure to participate, I think, for the first time in an event of the Centro Studi sul Federalismo. And I have been lucky, even if my son is at home, you probably have seen him from time to time. So I hope he will respect me while I speak, but I cannot make a promise on that.
It's the next generation EU.
Next generation EU, correct. But I have been listening to you all from the beginning, and I'm really pleased to be able to hear. And I did not come with prepared remarks, but I have the presentation and I have the Spanish translation, even though it's a bit rough translation of the original paper by the SPD. And I have taken notes of the things you have said, and then I have a few ideas from before in my mind. No? So the first thing I like to say is, maybe it's not very important, but since we are in Centro Studi sul Federalismo, there is an old polemic, but maybe this has been overcome, hopefully so. Domenico probably knows about that too. That we should not talk about a federal army before having a federal government, a true federal government in Europe. It was kind of seen at this as putting the carriage in front of the horses, no? Someone said at the beginning, I think was Fritz, the Commission is not a real government, the Parliament is not a real Parliament. So if we don't have a real government, how come we are going to have a common army? Well, I see the reasoning behind this, but I think in reality, if we see the way European integration has progressed since 1950, it has been by a system of precipitation in different fields. It has not been a preordained process, first the economics, then the politics, then the army. It has indeed, as the German paper explains very well, we remember the first attempt to the European army was back in 1952, and it almost came about. It was, I think, a bit of bad luck what happened in the French National Assembly, this strange coalition of Gaullists and communists that were able to defeat it. So all my support to further integration in the security and military field. Also, I would say from a federalist perspective, because we should progress in every possible field. And some of you have mentioned, Daniel too, but also others, that with the Conference on the Future of Europe, we have a big opportunity to make progress. Because even if, of course, again, from a federalist perspective, we tend to see the conference as an opportunity for institutional development, not so much policy development. In this case, the policy and the institutional are very much interlinked. And you yourself have made references to the treaty, Domenico Moro, which possibilities we have in the treaty. Daniel too has referred to that, the problem of unanimity, of course, the different strategic cultures. Daniel, you very well have spoken on your behalf, and you work for the EU Institute, but of course Malta is a neutral country. I can imagine this is not the most popular topic in back home, no? Not to put you in the spot, huh? Just
you're correct.
Thinking aloud. Thinking aloud. So here the policy and institutional are very much interlinked. And then since member states and national sovereignty and intergovernmentalism are so present in this field, on other policy fields, think of climate, we can hold these discussions in parliament, but in this topic, it has to be a larger discussion, and particularly with council and member states. And the setting of the conference, when hopefully it starts, I think it's an ideal one for that. Then going back to more now to the content of the paper, which I found very interesting, I will play a little bit of devil's advocate now, because we have heard a lot about European army, not necessarily in the version that is proposed by Fritsch and the 20th Army, but the idea of European army has been around for a while. Some of you have said Merkel has proposed it, Macron has proposed it, but without explaining what do they mean by a European army, no? In reality. And some people, when they hear, some people active in this field that I have told to in the past, they say, okay, European army, but this is like a bit, some people, not you, huh? I'm just saying this maybe for better communication of our proposals, no? That is an idea that falls from the sky, a bit disconnected of what's going on right now in the field, no? And of course, if someone has mentioned Article 44 of the treaty, in Article 44, it is said that in a way, in the field of military or defense integration, there are like different phases, no? There is one that is the progressive definition of a common defense policy, in which we are still, this is still the current phase. And then there is another one, which is the common defense. And to go from the progressive definition to a common defense, you need a unanimous decision by Council, right? I think by European Council, I even will say, but well, Council or European Council, not the important thing for what I wanted to say. So the first thing, maybe what we need to do, and if it's well explained in the paper, forgive me, because as I said, I have read a Spanish translation done with Google Translate by my team, and it's not then revised, and some things are not fully clear. But when we talk about European army, are we thinking in the last step of Article 44, the common defense, from the progressive definition to common defense, or is it a third phase that we were imagining after the common defense, which is not yet in the treaty? I think that could be interesting to see how you like to frame it, because then we have a roadmap at least, no? Even if we know we're aiming for something which is not particularly easy, though worthwhile, of course. Progressive definition, common defense, and then European army, or common defense is how we, the version of common defense that we like is the European army that we propose in the 28th Army. Because some other people will say, no, for us, the common defense is not the European army, is the real application of the military, the defensive alliance. Because, you know, there is also the clause of mutual assistance in defense. So some people, some experts at least that I have talked to, they say, well, it's in the treaty, but we have not really make it real, concrete. So the last phase of Article 44 could be the real application of the defense, you know, the mutual assistance clause in defense. But this is maybe a different concept, of course, because it is more the military alliance, no? It's not the European army. So not taking sides, just saying how we can put this proposal in the context of you know, other possibilities that people are proposing. No? Now, what is interesting of what you have been saying, also by Domenico Moro, is that if I understood you correctly, and this should also be clear because in the paper it's not so clear to me, but again, forgive me for my diagonal reading, whether we need to change the treaty or not to go forward with this proposal. This should be clear because even if we need a unanimous decision, and we know this is always going to be hard, it is true we have also the possibility of enhanced cooperation, but if we need to change the treaty, it's a whole different game, no? And apparently, according to Domenico, we don't need to change the treaty, no? You think that Article 31 can allow this proposal to move forward within the treaty, which is, I think, good news. I think it's a good proposal, the one you have made, to have a committee on defense in the European Parliament. This is also possible within the treaties, of course. The Parliament is totally free to create committees in any topic, I think. I don't see a particular treaty provision banning the Parliament from upgrading the current subcommittee in AFET, SEDE, into a full committee. I think that's perfectly possible. And then the last point, Fritz Felgentreu, somehow maybe his subconscious betrayed him a little bit and went back to this very German idea. I only hear it from Germans that the legitimacy problem of the European Parliament comes from the way we allocate the seats, no? The digressive proportionality. You only hear this from Germans. I'm not saying you're wrong, but it's very interesting. You only hear it from Germans. No, the real legitimacy problem of the European Parliament, if any, is that we don't have the right of initiative, and we don't have much to say by way of legislation in terms of security and foreign policy, and then that we don't decide on the revenue side of the budget. No, so I think this is just a. But why I'm saying that, because I think that this will be my recommendation, because I support the proposal. I support the proposal, but if we want to move it forward, I think it will be good to take this discussion to the European Parliament of the 28th Army, whether in SEDE or in AFET, because it's interesting, and I'm curious to see, because the German delegation of SPD, it has not been traditionally very keen on supporting integration in security and defense. So you are presenting this paper on behalf of the party, but then I don't know if there is a disconnect or sorts, maybe you can explain, but traditionally your colleagues in the European Parliament, which is, I think, a strategic venue to promote this, because in the end we're talking about the European Army. So far, when we have voted resolutions about, stronger, activity by the EU in security and defense, they have, I'm speaking, generally and out of memory, I don't have now a specific case, but maybe even breaking ranks with the overall S&D group in this topic and taking a more traditional German pacifist line, no? If I can call it that way. So I'm curious to see how we can bridge this gap, because I think it's very important to have so important, at least in my political group. Maybe it's different in the Christian Democratic group, but in the Social Democratic group, it's very important to have this delegation on board, and we can advance this proposal together in the European Parliament. So this is it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. Obviously, there are plenty of ideas, plenty of food for thought, but I would like to underline 4 points for the second part of our debate. Very briefly, one is the scenario. I mean, to use Domenico's word, what is it for? What is it for a 28th army? But also, what is it for European strategic autonomy? So the point is the strategic scenario, as Daniel mentioned. Second point is are the military aspects. So there are plenty of instruments, battle groups, etc. You know much better than me. So at least probably we need a rationalization of all these fragmented scenario. And I think that the SPD proposal is very useful for making some step forward in this sense. The third point is the institutional architecture, of course. Even in our debate now, we have those relying more, I would say, on the intergovernmental approach, and the paper itself and others are more of the pushing on the EU institution. And I agree with Dominic, but also with the paper, that the role of the European Parliament is at the core of the debate, because in one way or another, the Parliament is where the citizens are involved, the European citizens are involved in this debate on the security of themselves, in a sense. And the fourth point is the next political steps. It is how we use this opportunity for making some concrete step forward. And if I'm not wrong, the paper was released at the beginning of October, and it was hoping for an active role of the German presidency of the council for making some step forward, but partly due to the pandemic, I think that was not so evident. But at least we had the first step in the strategic compass. So probably that could be a framework in which to support this idea. But we also, I think we should consider that we will have elections in Germany this year and France next year. So this could be either an opportunity for supporting this debate or a break to this debate, because probably to some extent is a sensitive issue for national debates. Last but not least, the conference on the future of Europe. It's an opportunity, but we at the Centro Studi sul Federalismo, we like to underline that this is or this will be a conference on the future of Europe, not of the European Union. So I go back to my first point. It's an opportunity for discussing the strategic scenario. So what is Europe for, to some extent? What is the role of Europe in the world? As Daniel Fiot mentioned, what are we supporting? Which are our ideas for the new institutional security architecture in Europe? How we deal with Russia? How we deal with our role towards Africa? So the future of Europe is related to how we design our strategic role. And obviously, as some of you mentioned, the new US administration is both an opportunity and a challenge to Europe. So we will not go back to the old good days, regardless of the fact if they were so good, which is not so evident. And so we should have a fresh idea, fresh thoughts also in dealing with the new multilateral scenario. So the scenario, the military aspect, the institutional architecture, and the political steps. I would suggest, I would like that the last word is to Dr. Felgentreu, but for this second round, I think we can follow the same order. So you, Dr. Felgentreu, you have the floor, then Domenico, the panelists, and the last word to you again. You are muted. You should open the microphone.
Thank you very much, Direttore Brugnoli. There was a wealth of comments and ideas here that I'm confronted with. In my answer, I will concentrate on a few of the more spinous issues that were raised by Dominic Ruiz de Veza, and on the very central question, what is it for? Because I think when you actually embark on the way of building such a 28th Army, you will have to answer a whole set of questions that will give military integration of Europe, in my opinion, a big boost. The first and most important ground-laying question is, what is it for? I told you that we started thinking about the idea of a 28th Army after the French impulse for creating a real European intervention army. And because you have to start with small dimension, I think that is the only sensible answer. In the beginning, a European army, simply due to its size, could, in my opinion, be most efficiently be used for minor interventions in different critical places in the world. The first place that I actually thought about, and this is probably something that you've been discussing a lot in Italy, was Libya. Because Libya is evidently of crucial importance for Europe's security. At the moment, Libya is the development in Libya is strongly influenced by the fact that we've destroyed the Libyan state and created a power vacuum there. That is that states like Russia and Turkey are trying to fill. States that are not particularly friendly, that don't have a particularly friendly disposition towards Europe, and that would certainly states that would certainly exploit their power over Libya in a way that is not in our interest. So one scenario I had in mind when I started thinking about a small 28th Army with the strength of a fully operational brigade was a scenario where you would have some kind of unrest in a place like Tripoli or Benghazi, and where we would at least be able to send 1 or 2 battalions in to step out the fire and then draw them back. But simply to show Europe is there, Europe is able to react, Europe can employ serious force in order to sort out a problem where it's unavoidable. That was the first scenario I had in mind. That said, in order to convince other Europeans, you would have to think in larger dimensions. And I think if you actually set about writing a European White Book, then the first sentence of that European White Book would have to be, the European Union protects the territorial integrity of its member states. So that would also encompass the military interests and security interests of the Baltic states, for example, and Poland. And I think it would be necessary to not only put this down in paper, but to actually think it through what this means. which is another reason why I think that starting with a strong army component that relies on infantry capabilities is helpful, because such an institution could prove that it's actually useful, that it can make a difference, and then of course it can transfer its capabilities to tasks within the framework of alliance defense as well, and gain trust simply by being there and by proving that it works. So this is something that I think is something we have to keep in mind, and we need some very good strategic thinkers to embark on developing the strategic compass into something like a white book for a European army, because I think that kind of thing would be needed actually. But the boost would be on other levels as well. It would, for example, we would have to create a European procurement agency for such an army. At the moment, whenever we start about intergovernmental cooperation, you always run into problems with national interest where it comes to industry, defense industry. Every country tries to protect their own defense industry and act in their interest where we have intergovernmental cooperation, which is perfectly legitimate. I'm not criticizing it, but it hampers our development. When you have a 28th Army, you have to settle these issues. It has to be, you have to have procurement. You have to decide which arms, which systems such an army would have to be equipped with. You would have to make these decisions. And you would have to have an institution that makes these decisions. It has a European procurement agency. So that would be a big boost towards unifying Europe's defense industry. Because if it works there, it can work in other places. It could be a model. So nonetheless, when I first started kicking the ball around and discussing this question with experts within Germany, many of them asked me, why do you want to start with something as conventional as an intervention army with basically infantry capabilities? If we are actually thinking on a European level, why don't we address threats that are new and that affect all of Europe? Why don't we build the 28th Army on the basis of capabilities in cyber defense and space defense, for example? Which is, in my opinion, they have a point. People who say that have a point. One reason why I was thinking in more conventional terms is that the idea that came from France in the beginning was just as conventional. And because many of the problems we're dealing with are just as conventional. Nonetheless, if we actually put our minds to building something like that, it might make sense, particularly in the European Parliament. I'm looking at Dominic here, to keep these ideas in mind and to hold cyber defense and space defense in perspective, because that actually might be something that it would make great sense to create on a European level. You have asked some pretty tough questions, Dominic. I must say, when I read the presentation by Domenico Moro and I listened to him, I was very excited to hear his ideas on Article 31, because this was something that I had not taken into account. When we first started out discussing these problems, we started out from Article 44, and it was my initial belief that Article 44 would suffice to create a European army if the European Council gave its consent. But when we went into it in more detail, we started having doubts, and we came to the conclusion that most likely it would be necessary to change the treaties, and we're fully aware of how difficult that is, and how much political will would have to be a basis for such a course to be taken. The main reason for that is that we could not conceive that from the very beginning all 27 would be willing to participate in building such an army. That means that if it's not all 27, I agree with you, by the way, that the critical mass would have to be some 8 or 10 member states, and that Spain, Italy, Germany, and France would have to be among them if you actually want a chance of success. Those were the member states that were mentioned here. But if not all member states are engaged in building the army from the very beginning, then, in my opinion, you would only on the level of decision making, only the countries or representatives of the countries could take part who are actually participating. That was a point we made in that paper. So you would have to have bodies within bodies. You would have to have a member state body within the Commission for the decision making and a member state body within the Parliament for decision making. And for that, you would need a legal basis. That's why we believe that it would probably be necessary to change the treaties. But if Article 31 offers a perspective that offers a door, a window for a different construction, I'm very happy with that. Also, I never assumed that everything we put down in that paper would simply be taken and implemented in the way we put it down. We thought the problem through from our perspective. We may have made mistakes, or we may have come up with ideas that won't be as widely accepted as we hoped. So it's a proposal, and I'm keen to hear different proposals that are maybe more viable than ours. That is perfectly fine, as long as we get the discussion going. This is not supposed to be some kind of SPD dictate for the rest of Europe on how to build a European army. So we'll see about that, but I'm very glad that Dominic says this is something that should be discussed in the European Parliament. I agree completely, and I have to say you really hit the right spot when you said that our SPD delegation in the European Parliament maybe is not the best partner for that. It's actually true. You're right. Most of the parliamentarians in that delegation come from the left wing of our party, and they have mostly avoided discussing questions of military strategy and military autonomy within Europe from a fundamentally pacifist standpoint. And that's a problem for us as well. I mean, this is something, this is an ongoing debate within the SPD. The debate itself is as old as the SPD is. Those of you who have an interest in history may have in mind or may remember that the first rift within the party opened up in 1914 at the beginning of the First World War, when Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg, who were then not communists but members of the SPD, refused to support the war effort, whereas the rest of the party went along with that. So we have this argument. We've had this argument forever. This is part of our culture as a party. But our representatives in the European Parliament mostly come only from one side of that argument, and that's the problem. But I'm happy to discuss these issues with the comrades there. We're still members of the same party, but of course there is a lot of convincing to do. That's just true. One thing that I jotted down here while I was listening to all of you was I smiled at General Camporini's remark that it helps diplomacy when you actually have some guns with it. It reminded me of the famous American saying, "Be nice but carry a big stick." That's the kind of thing that actually I think is necessary for Europe to develop. And when Daniel Fiot was talking about about the dangers that we're faced with and the risks, I thought it was very interesting that you mentioned China and the USA. I agree with you. Both countries have proven that they can antagonize the EU. It's not the USA, of course, is our ally on the basis of shared values. But the Trump administration has proven to us that the USA also views us as a competitor in some aspects, and that a US administration is not beyond coming up with a policy of divide et impera vis-a-vis the European Union, as does China, as does Russia, as does Turkey. So preserving European unity in the face of these risks is a huge task that demands a lot of willingness to abstract from national interest in the common interest of peace and prosperity and a good development for all of us. And it's by no means clear that we will be successful. But it's good. It's a good starting point to be aware of the risks. But I also thought it was interesting, Daniel, that that when you were talking about this, you did not mention Russia. I understand why. Russia is by far not as strong as China or the USA are. And but when you look at our partners and member states in the East, particularly the Baltics and Poland, that's where they see the major danger towards their security. And this has to be taken seriously when we try to do something together, because we need these countries as well, and they need to hear satisfying answers from all of us, even from the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Italians, who from their perspective are far away from all these Eastern European issues. But if we want to develop a shared perspective on security, we need to make progress there in that respect as well. And when I'm talking about cyber defense in particular, not only military defense, it is clear that the strongest activities in the field of disinformation, employing modern means of communication towards their own ends, Russia has the longest and darkest record amongst all our rivals and potential enemies. So this has to be taken seriously as well. I hope I have addressed most of the issues that were important to all of you. I would like to thank all of you for this wonderful and fruitful way, you have reacted towards our impulse, and I'm very curious on how this discussion is going to develop in the next 45 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have still 20 minutes, and I think
I'm flies. I'm sorry.
No. But I'll give you the last word for concluding the debate. But now I would give the floor to Domenico. If you have any comments on some specific point.
No. But, I think that the main problem, according to me, is to flush out or bring out France about the military matters. I have invited Nathalie Loiseau to attend our webinar, but she answered that she was very business, and then she couldn't attend this meeting. But the SPD proposal is a good point of convergence between France and Germany. The main advantage of SPD proposal is that national governments don't need to give up their sovereignty in military matters, but recognize a share of sovereignty to European level. Then I think that I have heard the intervention, the speech of Domenech, and also of Brando Benifei. I think that the European Parliament can have an important role in order to launch a debate on the SPD proposal. I see that between the panelists, directly or indirectly, there are at least 3 panelists that take part of the same group. SPD, Domenech, but also General Camporini, that is take part of Azione. Carlo Calenda is a member of the socialist group in the European Parliament. Then I think that we can think about an initiative of the socialist group in the European Parliament. There is two options. The most ambitious is to think about a resolution of the European Parliament on the SPD proposal. The other option is to ask for the European Parliament to organize some hearings on the SPD proposal in order to prepare a European Parliament resolution on about the proposal of SPD. Organize hearings by the European Parliament on this issue is compatible with coherent with the conference on the future of Europe, and that also could be a useful instrument in order see if we want to start a European debate on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Domenico.
Ahora puedes decir adiós.
Unfortunately, General Camporini has left us for other engagements, so I will give the floor to Daniel Fiot for some remarks.
Thank you very much. And also thank you to Dr. Vlegentrau for his responses to our responses. It's a good dialogue, I think. Maybe just to pick up on one or 2 points very briefly. Yeah? Of course, I would not want to compare the US and China as two twins in the world. They're very different, of course. But what I see and why I think it's very good that we think seriously about European defense is that we cannot have a strategic naivety to think that the US, which is still a very, very divided country and nation, we don't know where they will be in 4 years' time. And so we should prepare, if we're clever enough, we should be prepared for that scenario. And in this respect, I would say that we should probably also learn a bit from the pandemic and how unprepared we were as Europeans for that type of crisis. I would not wish it at all to think of a similar crisis in military terms for Europe and how we would respond. So it is about maturity and a bit of responsibility. And by the way, I can think of no better partner in pushing this as well than the US themselves. They have an interest in pushing this themselves, and I hope it continues. On the point of Russia, this is very serious. Of course, I did not want to diminish the position of Russia at all. And I think one of the problems we face today is not necessarily just Russian military aggression and all of the tools which you spoke about, disinformation, cyber, but as we've seen in the last few days, what happens in terms of a political implosion, which would also be a huge shock for European security as well. And we already see the scenario in Belarus. So it's a very unstable part of the world. And we also have to recognize, because it was mentioned as well earlier, I think by MEP Ruiz de Veza, about the mutual assistance clause and Article 42.7. And I would add to that as well the so-called Article 222 on solidarity clause, which means that every member state of the Union has the possibility of calling on the assistance and solidarity of their fellow member states in different ways, but it's still a very important political part of the treaties. And it comes to what I said about strategic solidarity. If our Eastern friends, Central Eastern European friends cannot rely on the EU to respond in case of a crisis, then we're doing something very wrong. It needs to be clear to them that we have their back. And of course, we know for historical reasons and political reasons that they may favor more NATO and Article 5. But another point which you raised, and I think is really critical here, and was shown and exposed to us after Crimea, was that we have two organizations, NATO and the EU. They have different competencies, different tools. And if we don't get these tools in the right order and use them properly, we may face significant crisis in the future of those trying to exploit us. So I think even the EU has come a long way, not just in defense, but certainly on hybrid threats, countering disinformation, cyber defense, critical infrastructure protection. This is all part of the discussion. And I should say as well, as many of you are probably familiar with the fact that there is a direct tasking from the Council, which says that we should prepare better for Article 42.7 and 222. And we should have that reflection, which is underway, by the way. But it connects to the discussions about defense. So I think it's a very rich debate. In my own personal time horizon, as I said, I have one foot in the institutional setup. 2021 will be crucial. But when the strategic compass is delivered in 2022 by the French and under their presidency, for me, this is just the beginning of the story. It cannot go cold. We have to continue with the momentum and the level of activity and political interest. And so we need member states, but I also, and I end on this point, I also very much underline what others have said. This is not a question just for politicians. This is a question for citizens. And we no longer have the luxury now of telling citizens that this is just a technical issue, defense. This is an issue which connects to their very way of life. And they feel it very much so, especially in the context of a pandemic, which is very real for people. So I will end there. I think this has been a fascinating debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. And as we have mentioned several times, the role of the European Parliament, and to some extent, we all expect that the next step will come from the European Parliament. Now, Dominic, you have a heavy burden to deal with, so you have the floor.
Thank you very much. It's been really very fascinating, and thank you in particular to Fritz Felgentreu for this important paper, and also for the candor of your answers. Honestly, I didn't mean at all to put you on the spot regarding our comrades, common comrades of SPD in the European Parliament. But that was the impression I had, that I didn't know if there had been new developments since this paper came about. Apparently not too much. So we have to keep working on that. So you can count on me. Probably we need to identify a champion in the SEDE subcommittee in the Parliament, someone that is interested in starting to talk about the 28th Army in SEDE. I am unfortunately not myself a member of SEDE, though I follow what happens there because I have an interest in European defense. But I think we can work together if you want to identify. It doesn't have to be a German, of course. I'm sure there will be MEPs from different political families interested in your proposal. So whatever I can do to help with that, you and the Centro Studi sul Federalismo can come with me. And yeah, thanks again. Wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Dominic. And obviously for us it's a first step, and we look forward to work together on the further steps. And by the way, we have recorded the debate, so we will put it in our website, and please feel free to use it for the next steps in the discussion. And as I said, I would like to leave to Dr. Felgentreu the last word, the conclusion. And we really thank you again for the paper, obviously, and for being with us and for these 2 hours. And as we like in theory, we like to be on time. We are perfectly on time to close at 7 p.m. So once more, thanks to everybody. Many thanks to everybody, and you have the floor for the conclusion.
Adios, adios. So my son wants to say goodbye.
Adios, adios.
Yeah, we are working for you. We are working for you. For the next generation.
Professore Brugnoli, la ringrazio per una conversazione molto stimolante. I think it's no accident, or it's no accident that the first productive reaction outside the boundaries of Germany is from Italy. I was actually, I didn't know that there was a Centro Studi sul Federalismo in your country, and I was intrigued when I saw it. But it makes perfect sense to me, because I think there are some very significant similarities in the political cultures of our two countries. We are both late nation states. We have both reached nationhood at a fairly late stage in the history of our nations, and this means that thinking along federalist lines of tradition is something that is deeply rooted in our political culture, because both our nation states started with smaller entities that were always pondering the intricate question on how to preserve security on the one hand, and as much sovereignty as possible on the other. There was always a necessity to think beyond your own boundaries, while at the same time trying to preserve sovereignty and the ability to decide for yourself the important matters of your country and of your state and your citizens. So it comes natural to Italians and to Germans, I believe, to see the European Union as a project of extension of this kind of thinking that in Germany started in the mid-17th century after the 30 years war, and also that started in Italy also at a very early stage in the history of your country. So it's natural for us to say, okay, if we want to be prosperous and secure, we'll have to give up certain aspects of our sovereignty, transfer them to a higher level, work together on that level, but preserve as much sovereignty as we can on the lower levels, because that's where we have cultural cohesion, that's where we know each other, that's where we can find the best solutions that work for our citizens. And other countries don't have that kind of tradition. But I hope that we are ready enough to enter into meaningful dialogue with these countries as well, and that we are able to take not to take everything we say or believe to be right as the only possible solution, but to be open to other ideas. And if we're that, and if we use this as a starting point, we could very well make it work. And of course, the European Parliament is the perfect platform to start and to embark on this dialogue. And if we can start it together, Dominic, I'd be very happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Perfect conclusion for our we cannot agree more on that vision. And so once more, thank you very much, and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen.